I'm so glad you did that on your own. I'm excited to speak to you today, honored to speak to you today. They said I could talk about whatever I wanted to talk about, which was a mistake on their part, but it's good for me. No, I'm joking. A few years ago, singer-songwriter Ben Rector recorded a track called Heroes. And I think it's especially relevant today. It's a song about growing up and watching the people you looked up to, your heroes, either fade away or fall. And the lyrics go like this: I miss my old heroes, I had to give them all away. I miss my old heroes, God, I wish they could have stayed. Because it turns out that the hardest part of growing up's not getting old, it's learning how the real world goes. I said it's relevant today, but it's also relevant in the church, isn't it? Gallup came out with a poll not long ago that said only 31% of Americans say they have a good deal of confidence in the church. The church has fallen on hard times. And we're asking ourselves, hey, where have all the leaders gone? Where have all the heroes gone? I've been in ministry since I was about 17, been around ministry since I was about 17, so about 5 years or so. And yeah, that's what ministry does to you, yeah. And if you name it, I've watched it happen firsthand. I've seen leaders be unfaithful to their spouses. I've witnessed embezzlement. That's a big one, yeah? Manipulation, abuse cover-up. And then I've also just seen pastors be jerks. You're like, okay, that's not illegal, but you're not a very nice person. And so these words, these lyrics resonate with me. I miss my old heroes. I miss my old heroes. And sometimes I think about the good heroes, the good mentors I've had in life. Some of them have moved on, some of them have passed away. At some point, it seems like if you have a mentor, if you have a hero, either they're going to leave you, they're going to fail, or eventually they'll die. Maybe today you come to church, and coming to church is almost a bit traumatic for you. So you come in and you see people preaching and raising their hands, and you think about those leaders or those pastors in your life who did those same things and then fell. Maybe you've been hurt by someone in your small group or your church, someone who took from you but never gave back. Maybe you fell on hard times, and even though you were at a place that said they were loving, everybody seemed to forget about you. Maybe this is the first time you've been at church in a while, and you struggle and you wonder to yourself, you know what? I love Jesus, but it's just so hard to be a part of a church. I usually don't give my sermon titles because I feel like most sermon titles are really cheesy. And there was this period when they were all the names of 80s rock songs. They were like, the title of my message today is Don't Stop Believing. Amen. It's taking care of business. We're going to be talking about taking care of business. But I do have a title today, and it's sort of this focus, this question that I want us to consider today. And it's this: where have all our heroes gone? Where have all our heroes gone? I'm going to be reading from the book of Hebrews. So if you have Hebrews, I'm going to be reading from chapter 11. Chapter 11. Let me give you some context as you're turning there. We're not really sure who wrote the book of Hebrews, but we can tell by reading this letter what's going on. They're Jewish believers, people who've turned to Christ, and they're experiencing persecution. They've experienced loss of property, and they are in danger of turning their backs on Jesus and returning to Judaism. And so essentially what we get in this passage is we get this author saying, hey, I know times are tough, but don't give up. Don't stop believing, all right? That forms the backdrop. So Hebrews 11, chapter 1. Now faith is the certainty of things hoped for, a proof of things not seen. For by it the people of old gained approval. By faith we understand that the world has been created by the word of God, so that what is seen has not been made out of things that are visible. So the author is encouraging their audience to have faith. Don't give up. Have faith in Jesus. The faith that he carries the universe on his shoulders. And then the author goes through and talks about the people of old and begins to discuss all of these Old Testament individuals. Okay, these people grew up in Judaism. They would have recognized every single one of those names. And essentially what the author is doing is the author is saying, hey, there are a lot of people throughout our history that you've learned about. Remember their stories. They didn't give up. You can learn from their example. Oftentimes, Hebrews 11 is called the Hall of Faith. Faith, not giving up even though what God has promised us is not seen. Now, I would encourage you throughout your week to dig into Hebrews chapter 11. I'm not going to be able to read the whole passage today, but I want to talk about the individuals. I'm going to give a quick recap of the individuals that are mentioned here. The author talks about Abel. We know that Abel gave God his best, and he was killed by his brother for it. His death became a cry for justice. Enoch lived a life so pleasing to God, he didn't experience death. Noah was obedient to God, despite the society around him. Abraham left his ancestral home in obedience to God. Sarah trusted God to give her a child in her old age. Isaac was willing to lay down his life in obedience to God. Jacob behaved as if God's promises were true. Joseph trusted God's promises even when he was sold into slavery. Moses led the children of Israel out of slavery. Rahab aligned herself with God's people instead of her own. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel, they all performed incredible feats for God despite the oppositions. We even get references to the prophet Isaiah, who was cut in half for his faith. Essentially, the author is emphasizing the importance of perseverance. Remember those people. In a sense, remember those heroes so that you can continue on. I love what one commentator says. He says, Israel was preeminently to be a historical people. They were always exhorted to remember and consider their history. It was their solemn duty to cherish the memory of the past. There are, if you read throughout the Old Testament, constant reminders to remember God's faithfulness and to remember the people that he used and to remember their faith. We are also called to be a historical people. People that look back and lean on the believers who came before us. When we go through tough times, we realize we are not alone. We have the saints from the past, and we have those people in the church who set examples for us today. In 2022, Taylor Swift gave a commencement address at NYU. And she talks about the graduates forging their own path in life, making a future for themselves, deciding who they want to be. And she says this, she says, I have some good news about all of this. It's totally up to you. I also have some terrible news. It's totally up to you. From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, we're bombarded with messages that says we can do life on our own. We can tackle life's big questions on our own. We can overcome our pain, our grief. We can understand God. Even we can have faith in Jesus alone, without the help of anyone else. We see this when we open up Instagram, when we watch the ads on YouTube, when we go to the mall. This idea that life is in our hands and our hands only. And sometimes that sounds really good. Good news. It's up to us. But when we really stop and think about it, that feeling gnaws within us, that terrifying news. It's up to me. It's up to us. You see, in the past, we defined ourselves through our community groups, through our institutions, through the church, through our friends and neighbors and family members. But oftentimes today, we even feel distant from the people that we live with. We feel distant even from the people in our church. Sometimes we come into church and we feel faceless, as if no one knows our stories. And that is a reflection of where we are at as a society. This idea that we are more connected than ever before, and yet that connection and that meaning and purpose comes through likes, shares, comments, and followers. We know more people than we ever have, and yet, where has that left us? We feel alone. The U.S. Surgeon General put out a report about loneliness. It concluded half of all Americans don't just feel lonely, they feel crushed by loneliness. If I had to take a guess, I would say at least half of you feel crushed by loneliness. Loneliness, according to this report, is deadlier than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, more dangerous than 6 alcoholic drinks a day. I know what you're thinking. If I get some friends, I can just do whatever I want. It's okay. Loneliness increases the risk of stroke and heart disease by 30%. We're told we can do it by ourselves, and yet we are alone. And yet the New Testament says something different. The New Testament basically takes for granted a body, the community of Christ. Those individuals from our past, from our present, to help us navigate the difficulties of life. This passage cuts against modern society. It basically says we need other people. We need mentors. You might even say we need heroes. We need friendships. I believe that there are 2 different types of mentors or friendships that we find in Hebrews. The one is distant mentors. Distant mentors. We see in Hebrews 11 that we can look back at the past, those people that we've never met, and find a connection to them that fuels our present. A little over a month ago, I traveled with my family to Oxford, to the UK, and I'm a pretty big C.S. Lewis fan, and Oxford is like Disneyland for C.S. Lewis fans, okay? It's like the Magnolia Silos for C.S. Lewis fans, okay? C.S. Lewis is my Joanna Gaines, all right? And so I'm taking my family and dragging my wife and my 3 boys, and they're being good sports. So I'm like, okay, I want you to look at this building. You see where those vines connect? Right above that, there's that window. That's where C.S. Lewis tutored his students. And then I'm like, see this path right here? One day, C.S. Lewis is having a conversation with J.R.R. Tolkien and his friend Hugo Dyson, and that becomes a catalyst for C.S. Lewis becoming a Christian. Oh, you see that sign for that zoo? C.S. Lewis was actually riding with his brother on his brother's motorcycle, and C.S. Lewis is in the sidecar, which is a fun picture. He's in the sidecar, and on the way to that zoo, he becomes a Christian. And so I'm pointing this out, and they're just like, we love it, Wade. Let's walk 2 more miles for this little bit of trivia. No, they're not. My boys are like, we just want ice cream and McDonald's while we're in the UK. The international cuisine. And so one day, I go to, I have this private tour at C.S. Lewis's house, the Kilns. And I have a tour guide, his name's Jonathan, and he's great. And we just nerd out for about an hour. We're just talking about C.S. Lewis and what he means to us in his writings. And it's weird, it's interesting, because I'm going through the house, and it almost feels like I'm visiting the home of an old friend, of someone who's kind of been there for me. And the tour's over, and I put on my rain jacket, it's raining, and I walk about 15 minutes to C.S. Lewis's church, where he worshiped for decades. And I find the pew where he worshiped. And I just kind of sit down in that pew, and I start thinking about his life. And Lewis's life wasn't easy. His brother was an alcoholic. He survived World War I, almost died. He received a wound that really affected him for the rest of his life. He had health issues. He lived through World War II and the Blitz and that scary time in England. His wife died of cancer. And there's even this reference in some of his writings where he talks about going to church and sitting down in church and not necessarily feeling it, but still doing it anyway. And so I'm sitting in the very spot where he experienced that. And I think to myself, if he can do it, I can do it. We need those mentors in our lives that we can look back on and say, if they didn't give up, I don't have to give up either. And we find those people in Scripture, but we find them throughout church history. In evangelicalism, we don't have patron saints. But I would encourage you to read through the Bible and find those individuals that you connect to. And let them be your guide. Read through church history. Find those people that seem to speak to you in your story, and let them be your guide. I think a lot of times, most of us, we know church history up until the end of 100 AD, and then we don't know anything till maybe like Billy Graham. And there are all these people that came before that passed the baton of faith forward. We should learn church history. Because by looking back at those faithful believers, it can help us in our life today. Who are your mentors that are distant? If someone were to take all the podcasts you listen to and all the books you read and YouTube videos, and they took all that and they gave them to somebody and they said, who are these persons, their mentors? What would they find? What would they find? Choose your heroes wisely. Assess what material you consume. We all need people to help us learn the Bible. But for many of us, I think we maybe read the Bible on our own and come in for like a 30-minute message on a Sunday. 45-minute message on a Sunday. And that's it. Who are our guides? So we need those distant mentors. But we also see in Hebrews how it talks about meeting together in community. We need those close mentors. Writer Malcolm Gladwell, he was asked about influencers and how many people have used influencers as their guides or their heroes lately. And he was asked about the longevity of that. And he says instead we should be asking ourselves this question: do I have people in my life who are anchors, who I can consistently turn to over time for guidance about what I should be doing or thinking or how I should be behaving. And for someone to play that crucial role, they should have to endure in your life. I think with a lot of mentorship, people that we look to for advice, it's grown more distant in recent years and more shallow. Who are those people that you look to? Here are 3 tips for choosing mentors or heroes. First, choose people. Choose people. Be intentional. We all have people that guide us. Why not choose those people instead of it just happening and we realize we shouldn't have been following them? Find those mentors. Choose people ahead of you. It's good to be in community and to hang out with people your own age. It's really good. We need that. But we also need people who are ahead of us in life. If all we have are friendships with people our own age, and we just kind of affirm our weaknesses, we don't talk about God, we haven't been intentional about choosing mentorship. Choose people ahead of you whose life bears good fruit. Don't look for the flashy. Don't follow leaders who are just the coolest, who can speak the best. Choose people with good fruit. Don't just choose me as a mentor because I'm the funniest person you've ever met, okay? Don't do it. Look at their life. Look at godliness and integrity over the long haul. And for those of us, for those individuals here who are older, will you be that mentorship to the next generation? We can find those from the Bible, those throughout church history, to be our guides. But even though we need others, we kind of run into something with this passage, don't we? That people often let us down. People often let us down. Some of you who have studied the Bible, you looked at the names in this passage, you might say, hey, hold up, Wade. If you study these people's lives, they actually did some things that were not great. Some of them, some very despicable things. What do we make of that? One thing to keep in mind is when you read the Old Testament, you read a passage like this, description doesn't always equal endorsement. So sometimes we read about these individuals in the Old Testament, and the Bible, what I appreciate so much, is honest about their flaws. Honest about their failures. And so when we look at Hebrews 11, right, we're told this is the hall of faith, but really it's the hall of flaw. Let's run through this list again. Noah, what did he do? He lost all control, went on a bender, and humiliated both himself and his family. Abraham lied about being single, which resulted in his wife Sarah almost being taken by another man. Sarah became jealous of her handmaiden Hagar and left her to die in the desert. Isaac, like his father, lied about not being married. Jacob deceived his loved ones and fell prey to deception himself. Joseph was a bragger who turned his brothers against him. Moses disobeyed God. Rahab was a prostitute. Samson was a womanizer. David coveted a woman not his wife, committed abuse, and ultimately murdered an innocent man. These individuals, right, are not all that great. And it reminds us of something important. We need other people. We need heroes. But those heroes, those people, they're imperfect. And that's why we see hurt in the church. I was listening to a podcast, and on the podcast, there was a man, a guest. His name is Travis McElroy. He's a very famous podcaster. And he got on this podcast where they talk about Christian pop culture from the late 90s, early 2000s. And they asked Travis about his faith, and he said he was an agnostic. And they said, well, tell us what led you there. So he tells the story about growing up in church, and he says, At 13, I talked to a pastor about lust. He said the pastor gave me really good advice and then was later unfaithful to his wife. He said one day he went to another pastor and he said, hey, sometimes, I don't know if Christianity's true. What do I do? And the pastor's like, well, you just have to have faith. Travis was like, but I don't have faith. And then here's the big one. When Travis was a young adult, his mom, the church secretary, was diagnosed with cancer. While she was being treated, the church leadership cut off her insurance because it cost them too much money. We've heard stories about this. Travis's story is not all that unique, sadly. Every day we get on to see another article from Julie Roars. We hear another story about people in church who've been hurt by a pastor, hurt in a spectacular way. And I think sometimes what usually happens, if we're not careful, when someone talks about being hurt, we can say things that are true, but not kind, not helpful. So we might say something like, well, most pastors are actually really great. Most people in the church are really caring. People who go to church actually give more to charity than anybody else. And while those things are true, what we have to be careful, what we have to do is just to rest in that hurt. And realize that when we're cut by people in the church, it oftentimes is more painful than being cut by anyone else. So when people come to you, are you quick to explain their pain away? Or are you quick to apologize or to listen? So that's the end of Hebrews 11, right? We need heroes, but also as we're reading this, we have history of the Old Testament. We know that our heroes are imperfect. Something to keep in mind is we believe that the Bible is inspired by God. It's God-breathed, as Paul says in 2 Timothy. We don't believe the verse citations are inspired. So chapter 1, verse 2, those were actually added in the 16th century. Now, they're really helpful. I'm super glad that we have them because I can say, hey, turn to Hebrews 11, and you all know where to go. But sometimes chapters are broken up in ways that might be confusing. And so if you're ever studying the Bible, this is a tip. If you're studying the Bible, read what happens before the passage you're studying and after to see if it helps you make sense of that passage that you're looking at. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go past Hebrews 11 into Hebrews chapter 12 because I feel like the ideas are connected here. So Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we also have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us rid ourselves of every obstacle and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking only at Jesus, the originator and the perfecter of the faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. I love what Kenneth Way says. He says, the point is not that we should focus on any of the feeble, quote-unquote, heroes of chapter 11 per se, but rather we should focus on Jesus. What does the author say? These witnesses, they're witnessing to the perfecter. We see them, and they have faith, but they're only reflecting in some way the person we really should be looking at, and that's Jesus. Growing up in church, I was a part of this organization, and I think the best way to describe it is to call it a Christian version of Boy Scouts. Yeah, you're like, that sounds really wild. It was. It's called Roll Rangers. Is there anyone here as a part of Rural Rangers? We've got a couple of people. We had some in the first service. Hey, I want you to look around. Here's the deal. If you ever find yourself in need of someone who can tie a knot while lighting a fire with one match and reciting the Lord's Prayer, these people are it. Okay? Some of you wonder how I got my wife. She's out of my league. It's because women love a man in a khaki Royal Ranger uniform, okay? That's how it happened. So when I was in Royal Rangers, they were all about, like, if you were ever lost in the woods, the first thing you had to do is you got to find north. They were all about that. It's like, hey, you get lost in the woods, first thing, find north. Which, in my perspective, it's like, okay, I'm lost in the woods. I found north. What do I do now? I don't know the directions. If I'm driving somewhere and they're like, okay, you got to go east, and then you got to go west, and then north again, I'd be like, hey, I'm just going to let you know I don't know the directions, okay? So they're all about finding north. And if it's nighttime, the best way to find north is the North Star. Okay, and so one thing they taught us is that you have the Big Dipper. So you find the Big Dipper, and at the end of the Big Dipper, the last two stars on the end of the cup, they're called pointer stars. And if you follow their trajectory up, you hit the North Star. And it's the last star on the handle of the Little Dipper. That's how you find true north. Polaris, the North Star. Okay, so if any of y'all are ever lost in the woods, now you know how to find north. You'll still be lost, but you'll know where Canada is, okay? What we get from this passage is that these individuals in Hebrews 11, they're pointer stars to the true north, to Jesus. And that's what we need to be in life. Jesus is the better of all of these individuals. I love how Timothy Keller says it. Jesus is the true and better version of these saints. Let's go through the list. Noah lost control. Jesus said, "Not my will, but your will be done." Abraham cared more about his safety than the safety of his family. Jesus died for his children. Sarah left Hagar to die in the desert. Jesus built his ministry around serving the individuals that society casts aside. Isaac perpetuated the sins of his father. Jesus perpetuated the perfection of his Father in heaven. Jacob deceived. Jesus resisted the deceptions of the devil. Joseph was a braggart. Jesus came in humility. Moses disobeyed God. Jesus obeyed the Father even when it took him to the cross. David murdered an innocent man. Jesus was an innocent man murdered for us. Even when we are at our quote-unquote best, he is the true and better versions of us. And so when we read about these heroes, when we come into contact with people at church, we understand that we should all be pointing to Christ, not to ourselves. Have you been hurt by those in the church? I can't explain your pain away. I can't say I'm really sorry. But I can tell you that Jesus knows what it's like to be hurt by people who are in religion. People who are supposed to be close to God but didn't act like it. He knows what it's like. He can relate to you. So when you come to church, when you worship and sing about Jesus, you worship somebody who knows what it was like to be let down by your heroes. Will you give this messy, imperfect church, this church that Jesus died for, another chance? A lot of times when we think of Jesus dying on the cross, we think of him dying for the outcast. But here's what's really interesting. Jesus also died for the hypocrites. He also died for the Pharisees. And if you read the book of Acts, there were some Pharisees who later chose to follow Jesus. Will you give others the chance that Jesus gives us. Maybe you're here, and maybe it's tough to come to church for a different reason. You come to church, and it's hard because you've let people down. Maybe you were in ministry, maybe you're a small group leader, maybe you're just at a church, and you weren't there for people when you should have been. You're the hypocrite. Jesus died for you too. You may come in and you say, I was the Pharisee. There's hope for Pharisees. The beauty of the gospel is that we can look at Jesus and relate to him because we too were victims of sin just like he was. We can also look at Jesus because he took our place as the aggressor. When we were the ones that hurt others, when we were the hypocrites. These stories show us that even the best attempts at human faithfulness fall short. They reveal our need for a Savior. In their best moments, these saints threw themselves on the mercy of God. Only Jesus can be the hero we need, our Savior. Not a pastor, not a leader, not a teacher, but Jesus. I think I mentioned maybe in a previous message about a friend of mine, a mentor, really a hero in my life. His name was Garland Owensby. He was a pastor. He was a professor at my Bible college, taught a number of classes. I was in a number of classes with him. And sadly, a couple years ago, Garland ended his own life. And when I read Hebrews 11, I think about him because you think about someone whose story didn't end well, but you can look to as an example, if I'm being honest. And at Garland's funeral, my buddy, Taylor Johnson, he gave this eulogy, and he tells this great story. Garland used to travel and preach at youth camps, and there could even be some people here who were at some of those youth camps, some Royal Rangers who were at the youth camps. And one day he preaches at the youth camp, and Garland gets off stage, and my friend Taylor says, this kid who doesn't look very cool, doesn't seem like he has a lot of friends, he comes up to Garland, and he is so excited to talk to the camp speaker. And he starts talking to Garland, and this kid, he just starts lying about everything. Lying about everything. He's trying to get Garland's attention. He's telling these stories. He's spinning these yarns. And at one point, he says, I used to be a part of ROTC. He said, one day we're doing jumping jacks, and my leader, he grabbed a grenade, and he pulled the pin, and he threw it down right in front of us. He said, everybody else ran away, but I jumped on that grenade to protect my fellow ROTC comrades in arms. And it was a fake. It was a test. I passed the test. And so the kid, he tells the story, and then he kind of gets distracted. And my friend Taylor goes up to Garland and says, hey, that's from the Captain America movie. and my friend Garland goes, I know. And the kid comes back, and he's talking, and eventually he sees that Garland's paying attention to him. And my friend Taylor says this kid relaxes into the truth. He opens up. He shares his real self. He said this poor kid wanted nothing more than for the camp speaker to talk to him, and he thought he wasn't interesting enough on his own to warrant Garland's attention. He had to pretend to be someone else in order to earn his love. But he didn't humiliate him. He looked at him. And I love how Taylor sums up the story. He said it was like he was telling these students, telling this kid, you don't need to be Captain America for me to care about you. You don't need to be a hero for me to care about you. When we have godly people in our lives, we can look to their examples and they tell us something about Jesus. Garland taught us something about Jesus. Jesus doesn't look at us and say, you have to be a hero for me to love you. And I think that's the key to hypocrisy in church. Why do we hurt people? Why do we try to climb on top? Why do we exaggerate about ourselves? Why do we try to make friends and cut other people off from the friends why do we do those things? Why don't we care about others when we should? Why? Because we're trying to prop ourselves up. Why do religious people hurt other people? Because they feel like they've earned God's love and everybody else has to earn it. But when we truly understand, we don't have to be that. We don't have to earn that love. That God gives it freely. It changes us. It helps us to not become like those who have hurt us, to learn to forgive like Jesus did when he was betrayed, to elevate to leadership those who reflect Jesus rather than those who are just the most gifted, to seek Jesus rather than a name for ourselves, to seek comfort knowing that despite being hurt by those inside the church, Jesus is the true perfecter of our faith, who loved us even when we were far from him. Will we stop trying to earn God's love by attempting to be the hero? And will we stop making others do the same? This week, who are those mentors that you need to look to? How do you need to get plugged in at church? How will you give church a second chance? And then, how will you stop trying to earn God's love and let that love flow through you to other people? We let God take this heart of a Pharisee and turn it into something more. Where have all the heroes gone? The truth is, they were never heroes to begin with. They were just in all their flaws, trying to point to Jesus. May we do the same.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's message on our Wake Church YouTube channel. I pray that this was an encouragement to you and that you are challenged to grow deeper in your faith. If this message has encouraged you, do us a favor and go ahead and share it with a friend. And make sure to subscribe to this channel for more weekly content just like this, and you'll be notified when we go live on Sunday mornings. Lastly, we want to say thank you for your generosity. If you'd like to support our mission, you could go to wakechurch.com/give or simply click on the give button on the screen. Thanks again for tuning in. We love you.